to this session on game design constraints and player experience. The idea is set clearly. With very limited inputs, a game can still produce a surprisingly rich and intense experience. That tension between simplicity and depth will guide the whole discussion. Let's start by looking at the origin story behind the project. We move from Ojiro Fumoto's background as an opera singer to his rapid prototyping process, where one game per week helped shape the final idea. From this early experimentation, a breakthrough emerged almost by accident and became the foundation for Downwell. Time to focus on the central inversion that makes the game stand out. Instead of climbing upward like a traditional platformer, the player is pulled downward, which changes both the psychology and the pacing. The result is a constant sense of pressure, where the path itself becomes the danger. Let's move on to the next idea, how the control scheme is stripped down to an extreme level. With movement on one thumb and a single action on the other, the design stays simple on the surface, but that simplicity is what forces every input to matter. It is a strong example of how constraint can create focus and originality. Now, the core mechanic comes into view. Shooting is not treated as a separate combat system, but as part of movement itself, because every shot slows the descent. That means the gun becomes a tool for both attacking and controlling speed, turning combat into navigation. Time to break the action into a repeating loop. The player falls, shoots to manage the descent, lands on enemies to reload, and then repeats the cycle without ever fully stopping. It creates a rhythm that feels fast, risky, and highly readable once the player understands it. Here we see that the gun is doing more than firing bullets. It acts like a brake pedal and a steering wheel at the same time, letting players hover, reposition, and shape their trajectory. The visual examples make it clear that weapon rhythm directly affects movement control. This chart shows how different weapons change the player's movement physics. Each option sits in a different balance of damage and recoil, which means choosing a weapon is also choosing a style of descent. In Downwell, loadout decisions are really mobility decisions. Let's focus on combo design for a minute, where staying airborne and eliminating enemies in sequence becomes a major reward loop. The higher the combo, the greater the payoff, but also the greater the risk. It pushes the player from basic survival into a more demanding and acrobatic form of mastery. Here, the game's pacing strategy becomes visible. After intense combat, the designer inserts quiet zones that pause the action and let the player recover without breaking momentum completely. These moments of respite are essential because they keep the experience from becoming overwhelming. You need to connect the game's feeling to a broader academic framework of juice. The key idea is that feedback should be immediate, multi-sensory, and exaggerated enough to make every action feel powerful. In other words, the game's responsiveness is not decoration, but a core part of the experience. Now we get a close look at how visceral feedback is engineered. A stomp triggers a pause, a screen shake, a burst of particles, and a recoil animation all at once, so the impact feels heavy and satisfying. The combination of these effects makes every interaction feel physical and consequential. Now, let's try to explain how the game escalates difficulty while teaching mastery. Each world changes the rules just enough to demand new habits, from open caverns to underwater survival to harsher final stage threats. The structure keeps pressure rising while still building on what the player already knows, and we can highlight how players begin to break the system once they understand it deeply enough. Certain item combinations create powerful synergies, and those discoveries become part of the strategic meta. The examples show that the game rewards experimentation as much as execution. Finally, let's bring everything together in the broader philosophy of Downwell. The message is that depth does not come from adding more features, but from making a small set of mechanics work harder. By turning feedback into gameplay and constraint into creativity, the design achieves a rare kind of elegance.